Okay, good morning, and welcome to the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Administration and Projects Committee meeting on Thursday, March 3rd, 2022. I'm Newell Eiderich, chair for another few minutes, and please give your attention to this short video which will explain our virtual meeting process. Christina?
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should mute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice for public comment guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items.
Right.
Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Great, Christina, thank you so much. And just a big thank you to both Christina and Terry Ann. Most people don't realize how much work it takes to do these virtual meetings and everything behind the scenes. So thank you. And we all know it's going to get even more complicated as state law is going to require us to do both in-person and virtual meetings at the same time. And thank you for helping get that initiative move forward. And at this time, Christina, would you please call a roll?
Yes, Chair Arnrich.
Here.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Here.
Member Butt.
Here.
Member Geringer.
Here.
And Member Thorpe.
Here.
We have all of our members present.
Great, thank you for that. And the next item is item number 2 on our agenda, which is for public comment. And this is an opportunity for anybody joining us today to comment on anything that's not on the agenda. And because it's not on the agenda, we will not be able to discuss it, but we can refer it to staff and/or for a future meeting. And we will also have public comment as items come up later, and we will call on you specifically. So at this time, we'll start to see if we've had any written comments submitted in time for this meeting, Christina.
No, we have not received any written comments.
Okay. And if there's anybody who's joining us today who would like to make public comment, please use your virtual raise hand feature in the Zoom, and we will call on you at this time, and you would have 3 minutes to speak to us. If there's anybody now who would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand. Christina, I do not see any. Do you see on yours?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, great. And then we'll close the public hearing, and thank you. And that will take us to item number 3. This is elections. And it's this time of year under item 3A for the election of a chair and a vice chair for 2022. And at this time I will call, are there any nominations for chair and vice chair? Teresa.
Excuse me. I would like to nominate Vice Chair Nowak as chair and Commissioner Butt as vice chair for the upcoming year.
Okay, great. Is there a second?
Second.
And are there any further nominations? Seeing none, Christina, would you please call the roll?
I just, did I hear my name put in nomination?
For vice chair.
Hello, Tom. Yeah, for vice chair.
I was wondering if you were going to jump in or.
So, it's okay with me, but, I am termed out and my last day in elected office will be about January the 15th, 2023. So just as long as you know that. The election of officers will come after that. So I'm happy to do it, but on the other hand, you may want to get somebody who's going to be around.
Well, it is vice chair, so,
Right, I understand. Okay, all right.
okay. All right, great. Christina, you please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Arnrich,
Yes,
Vice Chair Nowak,
Yes,
Member Butt,
Yes,
Member Geringer,
Yes.
and Member Thorpe.
Aye.
The motion passes with all members present.
congratulations. And Sue, I think you're in charge right now, aren't you?
okay, I take over. One of those passing of the gavels. Well, thank you.
It's
And,
fast.
and let me thank Noel for his great leadership. As always, he runs such an efficient, beautifully run meetings. I will have a hard time following that, but I will do the best I can to follow in Noel's footsteps. So thank you so much, Noel. Really appreciate it. Teresa?
I just wanted to also thank Newell and that piece where we're glad that while you're passing the gavel, you'll still be here with your great questions and background and knowledge. So thank you, Newell, for your leadership this year.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. Are there any changes, comments, anything from the committee? Anybody want to pull anything? No? Okay. Is there anyone that would like to speak on public comment on this, on the consent calendar? I don't see any hands raised.
See no hands raised either.
No. Were there any written comments?
We
on
did
the
not
consent
receive,
calendar?
we did not receive any written comments either.
Great, thank you. Do we have a motion?
I move that we adopt the consent calendar as presented.
Second, Geringer.
Great. We have a first by Newell and a second by Teresa. May we have the roll call vote, please?
Chair Nowak,
Yes?
Vice Chair Butt,
yes,
Member Geringer,
Aye.
Member Thorpe,
Aye.
and Member Arnrich.
Yes,
The motion passes unanimously.
Great, thanks. Next item on the agenda is an informational item, and I believe Lindsay is going to introduce that.
Actually, I believe it should be listed as an action item on
Oh,
our agenda today.
that's okay.
Do
Well,
have a few items to talk about at the state level. So perhaps we can get started with the federal folks, since I see their faces on here. We have Madeline Pike and Gus Maples with our federal advocacy team, and they're going to share with us an update on what's happening in Washington.
Thanks, Lindsay, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'll just start off with something that probably everyone knows about. On Tuesday, the president gave his State of the Union address, and there's a lot of talk of infrastructure in there. So good news for the next couple of years when it comes to the administration's priorities. So that means his budget for FY23 will be coming out soon. As I mentioned, I think in the last meeting, we are still waiting to hear about the status of funding for FY22. We're waiting for another omnibus package, which is, when all of the appropriations bills get kind of lumped into one and it's one big funding bill. The Majority Leader Hoyer did mention, I think yesterday, the House is planning to vote on, or to take a vote on the 8th. The money for funding the government right now expires on the 11th. And so one thing that they're trying to kind of sweeten the deal with is adding some aid to Ukraine money to potentially get some more votes. So we're hopeful that this will actually happen quickly and soon. Another thing that I just want to mention is that we're also hoping that the member designated projects or community projects, the earmarks that we're not supposed to talk about, will be included. We've been hearing mixed things from offices, so we can't say quite for sure yet, but we're really hoping for that to be the case, and hopefully CCTA will get some good news from that. Separately, and Lindsay, I don't know if this is appropriate for right now, but I'm sure you can go into further depth later. I just wanted to give a quick overview of what the CCTA team has been doing in Washington. We have been having a series of really great conversations and meetings with both agencies within the administration and then members of our congressional district, including Congressman Swalwell, Congressman Thompson. We met with Senator Padilla and Senator Feinstein's staff. And yesterday we had a really good meeting with the Federal Transit Administration and the Deputy Secretary, Karina Ricks, along with their Office of Innovation Research, a lot of cool things.
Mobility innovation. Yes.
Yes. Even the Deputy Secretary forgets the name, so I don't feel too bad about myself. And then we also had a good meeting with the Department of Energy and their Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office. So all of these meetings are, obviously great opportunities for members of Congress and staff within the administration to hear what CCTA is working on currently, and highlight several projects that are coming down the pipeline that we potentially will be asking for federal funding for in terms of grants and things like that. So it's a good opportunity to start kind of socializing these projects with especially the congressional members that we're going to go back and ask for letters of support for. So I think that these meetings have been going quite well. We've been getting some really good feedback, especially from the administration. And I think that we'll continue to kind of go down this path and, maintain these relationships. So I think with that, that's all I have. Gus, if you have anything to add, please feel free to do so.
No, Maddie summed everything up. We've had, like she said, some great meetings with the congressional delegation and agency staff over the last couple of weeks. We're planning on a couple of follow-ups based on building off of those and looking forward to a good year with hopefully the appropriations bill getting enacted in the very near future, which will kickstart some of the funding increases from the infrastructure bill last fall and also open the door to a lot of the discretionary grants this year.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. Do any committee members have any questions for Gus or Maddie?
Cool.
Yeah, thank you. Either Gus or Madeline or both of you. Given the election, we have a primary here in California coming up in June. And do you think that the election itself is going to have an impact on getting this bill passed? Is putting money out there good for both sides, or is it only good for one side, or is it going to be a leverage point?
Maddie, do you want to?
Sure.
This is speculation.
Do you mean in terms of like a full government funding bill?
Not so much that. I think that one will go through. I think you said that. But in terms of what's been stalled in the Senate, for more infrastructure and all of that, I'm trying to think of what's the name of that bill. But
sure, Build Back Better. Okay,
yeah, Build Back Better. Yeah. It sounds like it's here, and people say, "Oh yeah, we got all this money." I said, "No, we don't. It's just talk." But it passed. Well, yeah, but it only passed half. So is there any chance of this really going forward? Seriously?
I don't have very high hopes. I think, the president did bring it up in the State of the Union. I think that they're still thinking that I don't want to say I'm, completely pessimistic about it, but, you're right. There is an election coming up, and there's a lot of money in that bill. And I know a lot of fiscal conservatives don't want to see that, going through. I don't know, Gus, do you have anything else to add?
I'd say that's probably the state of play right now. I do believe Senator Manchin, in his manner that he's been doing for the last however many months, sort of opened the door following the State of the Union to still being open to working together with the Democrats on this. That would, of course, be just on a partisan basis bill, and it would probably still be much smaller than what a lot of the party wants. But it didn't sound like the door was totally slammed after the State of the Union.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Any other questions for Gus or Madeline? Lindsay, and I assume we've got Mark coming up next.
We do have Mark Watts, our state advocate here, and I know he's got a lot to talk about because we also had a roster of bills in your packet that we wanted to discuss today. But before we jump into it, I did just want to give a brief update on an effort that our team has been working on for a few years now, which is part-time transit lanes, or running a transit buses on shoulders. And we have not yet, working in partnership with the California Transit Association, been able to really get a legislative proposal off the ground in the California legislature. But Caltrans recently released guidance for what they call transit bus on shoulders. And their request for comments closed last week, and I really just wanted to give a huge thank you to Hisham Noemi of our staff. He's been leading this project, and he managed to marshal a complete set of comments from the entire Bay Area delegation, including MTC, on short notice, which is a pretty big feat to get that many agencies to agree to a set of comments on guidance from Caltrans and submit it to them. And we have heard from Caltrans that those comments are well received, and we continue to work to try to move this concept forward to allow buses to use the shoulder when traffic is severely congested, not just along the 680 corridor, but we think this could have advantages on all of our major corridors in Contra Costa and throughout the state. So I just wanted to make you aware that we have submitted comments on that guidance. My guess is we'll probably include it as correspondence and communications in your board packet. So with that, Mark, I know we have a lot to talk about, so feel free to jump right in.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, and congratulations, Chair, and pleased to be here today. So today I'm going to cover three major topics. I'm going to talk about some legislation, and those are items that are reflected in the monthly APC memorandum that's in your packet. I'm also going to give you an update on where we stand on the budget process for transportation items. And then finally, there's a couple of administrative appointments and decisions that have been made that I want to just share with you real quickly when I get to that. But first, working with Lindsay, we put together a slate in mid-February, prior to the final deadline of bill introductions, of some of the bills that have brought the most attention to themselves. We have six to present in a new one that was more recently introduced that I'm going to talk about. But of the 6 that are in your packet, 3 we're recommending opposed, 2 we're recommending support, and 1 we're recommending watch. And I'll go through these very quickly. So the first 2 are measures that were introduced to deal with the gas tax adjustment, the annual gas tax adjustment that was enacted as part of SB1. And before I actually talk about the bills, as a reminder, the governor's budget package does include that proposal. Very disappointing, and it's kind of a mixed bag because he's the way the funds would normally go by formula to cities and counties. He's saying we're going to keep that flow going, even though they're taking away 3 cents a gallon. We're going to backfill it with basically with shop money from the state. So as you can imagine, people are not very happy with any aspect of what the governor's proposed. And in fact, the Self-Help County Coalition has taken an opposed position, as has the Transportation California Industry Group. So we've got, we're marshaling support to oppose the governor's budget proposal. The two bills at hand, one is AB 1626, the first bill in your packet by Assemblymember Nguyen, and it limits the annual adjustment to 2% each time we do it. So it's, for example, this year, it looks like a 5% adjustment is what was calculated. So we wouldn't be able to see that if this bill were enacted. So we're recommending opposed. The other measure is a little more draconian from trying to achieve a state of good repair in California. It would suspend the state fuel tax for a 6-month period, the entire tax, not just dealing with the annual adjustment. And the bill does propose, and I didn't mention the name, AB 1638 by Mr. Kiley. The bill would propose to backfill that, but the backfill would be on the amount of revenues collected in 2021, which was a COVID year. And we already know we were short that year. So even though he seems to be taking away with one hand and backfilling with another, it's only a partial backfill. So that's another bill that we are recommending opposed. The third opposed bill is Assembly Bill 1778 by Assemblymember Christine Garcia. And basically it says no state funds or any personnel time can be used to fund or permit freeway widenings, particularly in areas with high rates of pollution and poverty. The bill is bereft of definitions and it's got those kind of problems, but it sets aside CEQA and mitigation processes that are intended to give policymakers the tools to figure out if they want to proceed with a project, not just prevent it from happening by state fiat. So we're developing a oppose unless amended. We'll come back with suggested amendments before your next meeting so that you have the benefit of seeing what we're talking about there. On the support side, Senator Newman has introduced SB 873, and this bill addresses the California Transportation Commission and its responsibilities for making allocations. Currently, allocations for SHOP projects, for capital outlay support as well as capital projects are subject to review by the CTC. On the state STIP, the Caltrans portion of the STIP program, the capital elements are subject to CTC allocation and programming, but not the capital outlay support. This bill by Mr. Newman would complete the allocation and responsibility for the CTC. We think it's a good bill to ensure that there's no oversubscription for state sources, state resources, and that the most efficient amount of capital outlay support is being applied on an ongoing basis. The measure by Senator Becker, SB 917, it's sponsored by Seamless Bay Area, and this is the measure that would require transit agencies throughout the region to develop an integrated transit fare structure. We are recommending a watch because we think this bill is going to go through some gyrations as it gets ready for hearing and moves forward. And Lindsay just shared with me, and I wasn't aware of this, that MTC is taking support if amended. So they're developing some, or they're waiting to see what the language looks like when it's ready to move forward. The one bill that we didn't get into your packet, but it's one that I believe we would recommend support, but it may be a little premature, is AB 1944. Basically, it would waive the Brown Act requirements with respect to private addresses on meeting agendas for teleconference meetings. So that's it in a nutshell. Basically, live streams of meetings are would continue to be required to be available to the public so that they could monitor and access and make comments. I think one thing that may need to be done to this is the repetitive 30-day re-up resolution. And I don't know if talks are going on about that, but the fact sheet doesn't allude to it yet. So we'll be watching this and come back with a firm position in the near future. And the last support bill, which was a relief to see it introduced, is SB 922 by Senator Wiener. This follows in the footsteps of his earlier bill from 2 years ago that really made sweeping exclusions for transit and active transportation programs from CEQA. Oh my goodness, sorry. So basically, it's a streamlining bill that's on the books now. It was due to expire, and he is extending it indefinitely, and it allows a lot of streamlining with respect to transit facilities, bus operations and bus facilities. And it really does align with what we're trying to do here. I believe the issues about transit bus on shoulder would be included in this. And I think that, augurs well between what Lindsay shared with you about the state, about Caltrans guidelines. And if this bill is enacted, I think that makes some of the programs that you have in mind or projects you have in mind more achievable on a rapid basis. On the budget, I want to just remind you that the budget was introduced back in January. The Legislative Analyst Office has been reviewing it. The budget subcommittees have started work in mid-February. The two hearings by each of the individual budget subcommittees in both houses that relate to transportation, they conducted their transportation budget review last week. They both did about the same amount of review. They had some low-hanging fruit, just technical items that were needed to be done in the budget, and they got those done. They also were able to discuss, but not take action yet, on the governor's gas tax holiday proposal. In addition, they were able to discuss and have input from the public on the infrastructure package that the governor put together. And that package is pretty substantial. As a reminder, he's again this year combining and hoping to get a single package that includes high-speed rail funding for the Bakersfield to Merced segment. And that would take up the remainder of the Prop 1A bond funding at about $4.2 billion. But the sweetener in the package is he's actually added over $1 billion to what he had proposed last year. And it's $4.9 billion worth of transit and rail allocations. It's $2 billion for transit and rail statewide, $1.25 billion for transit in and around Southern California, ostensibly to help prepare for the Olympics coming. And there's a really significant pot for ATP programs and connectivity, like the new program in the Federal Act. And that's about $750 million. There's $500 million for grade separations around the state. Now, I suspect some of that would end up going for projects that help the high-speed rail system, but that remains to be seen. And then there's $400 million for climate adaptation. The whole point of this piece it's something I worked on last year and actually got to write the language that didn't go into effect, is to allow cities, counties, and regional entities access to money to address climate adaptation, planning grants to projects without having to deplete or use current sources that you have, sales tax sources and others. So it was a supplement to jumpstart climate adaptation programs. So that is what's in the balance. We have learned well, let me just stop there for a second. The next step for the transportation budgets, we won't see until April. The two committees announced this week that they're done for now. They're going to wait until April and see what additional proposals come in from the administration, as is typical in April, and then they'll reschedule meetings and get ready for the May revise. So there's a break in the action, but the Assembly is filling that break in the action by permitting, or I don't know how to say it in a way that's not offensive, but to allow members to make budget requests in this hiatus period. Lindsay and I have been talking about what may be something that a district may want to have done. So we'll be alerting you to those when we're ready to move on. And then finally, I mentioned I would turn to appointments and other administrative actions. The CTC is seeing in the midst of a changeover a little bit. Commissioner Alvarado, who's been there for, I think, 3 terms, elected to step down, and he's been his vacancy was filled with Jay Bradshaw, who is the executive secretary treasurer of the Northern California Carpenters, and essentially it's the Carpenters are replacing themselves with Jay Bradshaw. He's very welcome. He's doing a good job already in the first commission meeting he's been at. Commissioner Inman from Southern California, her term ended February 1st, but there's a provision that until it's filled, they're allowed to continue, and it has not been determined whether she's going to remain or if there will be a backfill. So in the meantime, she does fill that position. I have a feeling, though, with a commission meeting coming up in the next week, we may see that clarified and who's going to be sitting in that position, and hopefully it's Commissioner Inman. At the top of the transportation ladder here, when David Kim left, the secretary that we all much beloved throughout the state of California, the governor announced quickly that Caltrans Director Tokes Omishakin would backfill him. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been waiting for him to walk across the street and take on his new job. And finally, last week, he was sworn in. So he's now Secretary Omishakin. At Caltrans, the chief deputy has been kind of handling things for a couple of days, but we just got word that Stephen Keck, who's the budget deputy, very experienced, knows the numbers. He's the guy who helped us with the Iron Horse Trail because he grew up along the Iron Horse Trail, and he helped through the way for the final passage of that bill. He's been going to be designated as the acting director until the administration completes its national search. And so I think with those comments, I'll bring it to a close. Lindsay?
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mark. Lindsay, I'm assuming, well, we'll take some comments first, but I assume you want us to act on some of these requested support and opposed positions.
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. First, let's have, if there are any questions, Teresa?
Hi, before we move to vote, first of all, thank you, Mark, for the work that you do leading up to this and the great staff report. And unless I missed it, could you provide a little background on the Taxpayers Protection Act initiative? And I would like us to discuss potentially taking a position on that.
Absolutely. And I just self-excluded it because I thought I was going on and on, but I'm happy to talk about it. It's kind of been a stealth initiative. It was 2 versions were submitted by the California Roundtable and other allies like the Jarvis GAN folks back in the summer. And then one final one was the one that they went ahead with and had, the reviews by the Department of Finance and LAO office, Ledge Analyst office. And they've got clearance to start collecting, and that happened in February. And shortly on the heels of I'm just giving you the backdrop of where we are. Then I'll tell you about the measure. As soon as they got permission to move forward, $2 million moved into a campaign account, and they're starting to gather signatures. Now they have a really high hurdle to get over because it's pretty late in the process. for collecting signatures, but if they've got money, you can buy your way on. So that's in process, and I don't have a way to evaluate if it's actually going to qualify for November, or if they get it qualified, if it's not in time for November, it automatically flops over to the next election cycle. So that's where we are in this process. And that's why I call it the stealth, because people really pay attention, except a couple of us. The measure builds on Prop 22 from 2010. And if you kind of cast your mind back, and it was a very technical bill, and it tried to close the Prop 218 loopholes that they considered were loopholes. We considered them burdens to get the necessary revenues in place. But the same group sponsored that measure, and it redefined what a tax versus a fee is. And they built in some difficult requirements to surmount. This measure takes it a step further and says everything's a tax unless it's a fee. And here are the exemptions, and there are very few. They actually do go in and name the, well, not name it, but they describe it in a way that it's very conclusive, that the so-called Upland versus Cannabis citizen tax initiative by majority vote case law, it would be no longer a majority vote. They would define it, any kind of measure like that by the citizens that deal with taxes would require 2/3 votes. So if this measure passes, two things will happen in essence, in my view. Anybody, any entity in the state that has a citizens initiative dealing with taxes, and I know of three, there's Sacramento, Ventura, and San Diego under SANDAC, are going to have citizens that have formed initiatives to pass local sales taxes, self-help sales taxes. They would then be facing a super majority. The measure also has a provision I call a look back provision. It says anything that passes at the ballot in 2022 by a majority vote would have to be represented to the voters at a 2/3 vote. So they really built a real mousetrap here that if it goes ahead will catch everybody. So those are the elements I think are most germane, but you know, there are other details in the measure, and it's quite cumbersome.
Oh, thanks. That was good information. Other question, Teresa, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just, thank you very much. And I know that it's early in the process and they haven't gathered their signatures, but as you pointed out, they have the money to buy their way on to the ballot. And the California cities, the League of California Cities, and joined by a coalition that right now I don't have the information in front of me, have taken a strong opposed position. And I know that a number of our cities, we just approved to oppose the proposition in alignment with the California cities and that coalition. In the city of Lafayette on Monday evening, we voted to do that. And so I would like to get your sense, Mark. I mean, I think that it would be good for us, for CCTA, for us to recommend as part of this package that you have, that we also take an opposed position.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No. You know, the other pieces are, go into the whole strategy. I don't know if their intent is to get the signatures, get it on the ballot, and then use the strategy that they used for getting a soda tax ban through the legislature is something that they're doing. But I think that the earlier that there's strong opposition, the better.
I would agree with that assessment. And you know, what I might do, since we're in that period where it's not definitive yet, and we won't know probably till closer till end of May, how I could, and Lindsay, correct me if this is not something that's timely enough, but I could write up a position paper on it based on what the league and even CSAC and others have put together, and tailor it to the authority. and have that in the next cycle of APC and board meeting. And I think that would be timely enough. But that would give you more in depth of what you're actually looking at and voting to oppose.
If that works with Lindsay and with that would be great. And there's lots of information out and fact sheets. So thank you.
Great.
To the commissioner's discretion, if you want to add that to the motion, we're happy to do so.
Yeah, I think everybody sort of nod your head if you'd like that on the next go round of meetings. Because we can't really take a vote on that, but I certainly would like to see that on the next in the next meeting as well. Great, thanks. That was just a lot of information. Are there any other questions before I go to public comment on this? No. Did we get any written public comment on this item, Christina?
We did not.
And is there anybody in the public? If so, please raise your hand. I do not see any hands raised.
I don't see any raised either.
Okay, so we'll bring it back. Do we make a motion on the whole package or do we need to do this one by one?
You can recommend adoption of all the proposed positions.
Okay, unless there's somebody that has a one or any particular one that you.
Shaking her head.
Yeah, I can't tell. Do you?
Oh, no, I'm happy to make a motion on the whole package.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anyone that had one particular one that they disagreed with. Otherwise, we'll move forward with Teresa's motion to approve the entire package. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Geringer and a second from Commissioner Arnerich. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Nowak,
Yes?
Vice Chair Butt,
Yes.
Member Arnrich,
Yes.
Member Geringer,
Yes.
Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation, a lot of really wonderful information. So appreciate that. The next item on the agenda is an informational item introduced by Stephanie Hu to provide the East Contra Costa Dynamic Personal Micro Transit Project status update. Stephanie.
Hi, good morning, Chair Nowak and Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Hu, Director of Projects at CCTA. This item, as you mentioned, is an information item to provide you an update on DPMT. In December, you received a presentation on findings of the feasibility study on DPMT, and part of that presentation included recommended next steps, which were to conduct an industry outreach and also research on using public-private partnership or P3 delivery method. Today's presentation will be provided by Brent Butson. He is an attorney from Kaplan, Kirsch, and Rockwell. Brent's expertise is on alternative project delivery methods such as P3. He provided assistance in the industry outreach that we had last month, and he also has been helping the authority draft a P3 delivery model for the DPMT project. And his presentation today will cover these topics. And with that, I will turn it over to Brent.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I think you were going to share a PowerPoint as well. Happy to be here today. I know that we don't have all day, and there is a lot of information that we could share about public-private partnerships. I think we'll focus on sort of a high level, well, first, I guess, a reminder about the DPMT project. And I know everybody saw that last month, but just a little bit to remember why we're here and why we're talking about public-private partnerships at all. And then just briefly on what is a P3. And then we will talk kind of, again, high level for now about the type of procurement that we think could be pursued for the DPMT project, a little bit on CCTA's legal authority, and then the role that both CCTA and Tri-Delta Transit will have on the project. So that's a lot. It could go for hours. I'll try and keep it short, but would also very much welcome questions as we go. So before I jump into the deck itself, you were also provided an attachment, I think, a Word document, probably came across yesterday. I don't know if you had time to read it. That was, again, intended to just provide a little more supporting information and hopefully potentially spur some questions when we get to the what is a P3. And I think you'll see the reason we're talking a lot about what a P3 is because the proposed approach we're taking to the procurement is certainly different from what CCTA has done with major projects in the past, and is also different from what you might think of as a P3. So it's important to provide sort of that foundation before we get into details on the project itself. Stephanie, you could go to I think 2 slides. I went through the agenda already. So again, a reminder on the DPMT project itself and why we're here. The county had done, I guess CCTA had done an integrated transit study on East County transit priorities. And we put this up here, and we also presented this to industry when we met with them a couple weeks ago in one-on-one meetings as sort of the background for why was the feasibility study even done in the first place, and sort of what is the problem that we're trying to solve through this project. So won't spend a lot of time on it, but really, I think the bullets I would point out are supporting economic development, preparing for the future, and innovative transit options. And that's really what this DPMT project represents, is a new way of thinking about transit in the East County, and especially solving first mile, last mile connection challenges, which we're thinking and talking with industry that we're hopeful that some of the new technologies that are out there provide new opportunities to meet those challenges. So next slide. The feasibility study itself it's about a year ago now, in April 2021. I think it's been presented to you a few times over the course of the year, looked at the viability of the DPMT system. And one thing we'll note, because we are going to be hopefully starting a procurement here shortly, that the feasibility study itself did assume Glideways technology specifically, but we have some key project parameters for the project that we'll be putting out there, and it won't be Glideways specific. There are a number of technologies now in the market that could do this. Glideways is just one of many developing manufacturers. So next slide. Just a neat little diagram. I know Tim likes this diagram. I like it too. Kind of what does it mean to solve first and last mile challenges? Well, it's both ends. This is a Glideways vehicle, but it could be any sort of autonomous, on-demand personal transit to help you get to the rail system, get to your bus route, et cetera. So next slide. And last bit on the feasibility study. So the goals and the objectives. I know it's odd to put this at the end when I'm recapping the feasibility study itself. It was, of course, about transit accessibility and economic development, but I put it here as a transition to the discussion about P3s, because the third goal and objective was to evaluate the feasibility of attracting public funding and private financing. I think especially a new technology like this, especially a project that there isn't a ton of money planned already for this project. So this is a real opportunity to look at how a P3 could plug in. Going now to the next slide. What is a P3? And again, the supporting materials that we sent has a lot in there about what a P3 is, because I think we wanted to emphasize that there isn't a single definition of a public-private partnership. And what that looks like for this project is definitely not the same as what it looks like for other projects, or even other projects you may have bumped into along the way. I think at a high level, it's an agreement between the public sector owner and the private sector to do some element of a project that has historically been done by the public sector. But what that means really varies along a spectrum. So we don't think of P3 as any one thing. And when we talk about how we're looking to deliver this project as a P3, I think you'll see that we're kind of picking different elements of project delivery and combining them in a way that looks like a public-private partnership, but maybe isn't what you have in mind. So I think this spectrum just shows that increasing relevance and involvement of the private sector. This is both in terms of what the private sector does and the risk that the private sector takes in delivering a contract. We have everything from regular consultant contracts like mine at the bottom of the spectrum, moving on up to full privatization. Not all P3s are full privatization. And I think what we're talking about here today really lives in the green box, which is a spectrum of how you can deliver a project, including design, including construction, including finance, and including operations and maintenance. And which of those things that historically would have been done by CCTA entirely are we pulling the private sector in to assist on? If you go to the next slide. So when we think about delivery methods that you're probably familiar with for major projects, most projects that you've bumped into, most projects that CCTA has delivered, and the vast majority of projects that have been delivered in California are traditional design, bid, build projects. So you go, you pay an engineer, an architect to design a project, and then you bid it out to a contractor and they build it. It's being financed through bond sources or other public funds. And when it's complete, CCTA or Tri-Delta Transit or whomever on the public side will operate and on an ongoing basis maintain that project. That is what we call traditional delivery. But then when you move along that spectrum, I know CCTA has done some CMGC in the past, and design build it's not a huge part of project delivery in California, but you do have design build authority and see that from time to time. So that's where you're plugging in private sector a little more in the joint design and construction role. Keep moving along that spectrum. You could add private finance. And then when we get to public-private partnerships, as I think we normally think of them and how you normally think of them, it's when the private sector is doing all of those things, designing it, building it, bringing private finance to bear. It can be exclusively private finance, or it could be in combination with public sources. It could include project revenues like tolls or transit fares or not. There's different combinations of all of those things. So again, I could talk for hours and hours. There are whole conferences on what a P3 is and what you need to know, what you don't need to know. Again, there's more in that supporting Word document, but really, I think for purposes of today and talking about the DPMT project, thinking of P3 as a bundle of different parts and pieces of delivery of a project that come together and bring the private sector in to either perform or assist in performing things that the public sector would otherwise do. I think that's really the takeaway for today, is breaking down all of the elements of a project. So going back to the DPMT itself now, you've probably seen some of this, but the project requirements that we are assuming currently for the project, and we'll get into the procurement and how the private sector could bring innovation to bear or could challenge us on some of these assumptions to bring down costs, to make it work better. That's part of the P3 process that we really do want to explore, is maybe where we're asking for things we don't actually need, or and so on and so forth. And I think this is a good place to pause and say, nothing about a P3 means you're giving up control as a public sector. So these decisions through the procurement and on, there will always be gates and checks to ensure that the public side has the say that you want to have on these key elements. But at the same time, we want to be open to new ideas. So we're trying to strike that balance as we go forward. So for this project, on demand, 24/7, really short wait times for 99% of rides, and personal microtransit. So not shared vehicles is kind of our starting assumption for how this would operate. Fully autonomous, greenhouse gas neutral, and because there will inevitably be federal money involved here, of course, it's going to need to comply with Buy America, Buy American, ADA, all the other federal requirements. And then operationally, our starting point is fully separated from traffic. So no at-grade crossings, directionally separated. So it's not, I don't want to say track because it's not a rail, right? But it's not single track. You can operate in both directions at all times. And this is really a cost feature. Keep it at-grade as much as possible while still keeping it traffic separated. So that's asking for a lot in a single project. So if we go to the next slide, additional priorities. This is new. I'm sure Tim has conveyed to you that this is new technology. It's emerging. So really, proof of concept here, I think, is important for CCTA and East County, and giving private sector an opportunity to deploy something in partnership that it isn't everywhere and is new. And there may be some technological readiness considerations that we take into account as we're soliciting a partner to go through this process with us. And of course, safety, environmental sustainability, and fair policies. I mentioned before that the private sector doesn't necessarily get total control in a P3 model. Fair policies fit into that. So there will be a tension, obviously, between charging a fare that works to pay for a system while keeping it integrated with regional fare structures and making sure that it can still attract ridership. So that's way down the road, but certainly something that would be explored in partnership with the private sector. Next slide, please. I have to pause for a moment. David would really want me to pause for a moment here. And just the reason you don't see this a lot is that in California, there is not broad enabling P3 legislation. It's actually quite limited, alternative delivery generally and P3s. And neither CCTA nor Tri-Delta has inherent DBFOM contracting authority or broad authority where you could put this out there and not really need to think about it, which is the case in some states where all of the different functions that the private sector might take on in a project are on the table. That's not true for CCTA. So I'm explaining that because the delivery structure that we're proposing is very detailed and specific. And we went through conversations with industry on this, and it seems like they're on board. So we like where we're at, but we do need to point out that the reason this isn't common is because it's complex and it's not obvious and it's not obviously authorized. But that said, both CCTA and Tri-Delta have different project delivery authorizing statutes that in combination would, we think, offer the flexibility to proceed with a project as a public-private partnership, not necessarily a public-private partnership, but doing it with the different functions that create a public-private partnership that industry can get their arms around, understand, and frankly are willing to invest into. Next slide. So I will not spend a ton of time on this, but this is sort of the structure we're thinking about. And what's really important to point out here is first, the MOA at the top. This will be a joint procurement with Tri-Delta Transit because when we think about a public-private partnership and design, construction, finance, operations, and maintenance, CCTA doesn't have the operations and maintenance authority. That's what Tri-Delta Transit does in the East County. So from the start, this MOA will establish a joint process for both agencies proceeding with this procurement. The second thing to note, and the additional materials we provided talk a little bit about what goes into a P3 agreement. And I'll talk about the procurement and how we're phasing it in a minute. But the agreement itself here is really bootstrapping a number of different legal authorities that you do have. So, for example, you could combine construction of elements of the project under the design build law, because you can do that. But there are some constraints with the design build law. You can't do operations and maintenance on a design build project. You also have the Infrastructure Finance Act in California. You can use that. And that gives you the opportunity to do a long-term operations and maintenance contract where the private sector would take farebox revenues and could use those to help pay for the project. But that has a restriction on state funding. But all of that taken together can get you to a project that has design build, that has operations and maintenance, and that has an element of private finance, so long as the contracting structure recognizes color of money constraints and that the private partner would have to basically comply with all of those different legal restrictions simultaneously. So that's kind of the structure we're thinking could be implemented to do this in a phased approach over time. So the delivery model itself, I think another, again, I could do a whole 45 minutes at a conference on this method of P3 procurement because it is very specific and it's becoming more common. But this is basically a two-step public-private partnership where you do a pre-development agreement to develop the project further, and then you move into a development agreement at a later phase. And that's where you actually design and build the project. These sort of progressive models is what, it's the term of art in the industry, are becoming more common. And it's really where you don't have funding, you don't have environmental, you don't have some of the risk factors really nailed down, and you don't have a highly progressed design that you can take to market and bid in the conventional way. So what you do is you bring a partner in early to help develop the project through those phases. So that is what the team is proposing here. We're calling it a system pre-development agreement because if you recall the feasibility study presentation, it's a really big project at build out. But what we're thinking is initially there should be an exploration of what is the right place to start, an initial viable segment. So we will be commencing a procurement for a development partner to do this pre-development phase to help CCTA and TriDelta identify the funding sources. We heard about a lot of grant funding sources that are out there now. Lead those efforts in helping identify those grant sources, refining cost estimates, and really helping nail down where should this system start? Where's the logical place to go first? And is that financially feasible? Can it stand on its own and pay for itself through a combination of project revenues, available grant sources, et cetera? So that's sort of phase one of the PDA phase. And then within that initial pre-development, project development phase, once that is sort of nailed down where to start, then you could progress into NEPA and CEQA and negotiations of an agreement to actually execute the project. So it's a fairly long process, but we're fairly early in the process, and getting somebody who's qualified and does this and knows the technology and can run the financial numbers to ground engaged early, we think will help show that this is in fact feasible and makes sense for East County. So last couple slides here briefly on sort of what is the role of CCTA in this structure as paired against what is the role of TriDelta Transit. And we will, the team will be giving a similar presentation to the TriDelta board because again, this will be kind of together through the whole process. So CCTA is really leading the procurement. You led the industry outreach. We will develop the RFP and lead the selection of the team. And we'll lead the identification of funding through that first pre-development phase. And of course, any agreements that are entered into eventually, CCTA and TriDelta will both be counterparties on those agreements. So TriDelta, on the other hand, will be fully participated in the industry outreach. We'll review and comment on the draft RFP. Of course, given that operations and maintenance and the long-term, actually the doing of the project would be part of this procurement, they of course need to be involved to inform what makes sense from an operations and maintenance standpoint. So they'll participate in development of the project and negotiations with the team through this pre-development phase and participate in selection. But it's really CCTA led through procurement and through development of the project, and then with TriDelta in a supporting role until we get to O&M. And I think, so industry outreach. We mentioned that a couple weeks ago we had a number of one-on-one meetings. Well, first we did an industry forum that was open to everybody. We had technology companies. We had a lot of traditional participants from the infrastructure, finance, and equity world, and a number of really large construction engineering firms participate. Some of those engineering construction firms also participate on the finance side. They have their own equity arms. And then after the presentation to industry, we gave the opportunity to do one-on-one meetings with larger firms, well, actually with everybody, but mostly with larger firms who would have the potential to lead this effort or innovative technology companies. We had really good feedback, really good attendance. And Stephanie, you might know, we probably did 10 one-on-one meetings. Lots of really good questions from them in terms of, obviously long-term, what does this look like from a funding financing standpoint? What is this structure? It's a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. So we talked through some of the legal constraints that I was just talking through. And I think, I'll be frank, I think the feedback and response was better than I expected. So we have, until the procurement formally starts, we've invited folks to continue to schedule meetings with us to provide input to us or ask questions, basically so that when we do go out to market, we get it as close to right on the first go as possible. And then just on schedule, we're currently targeting, I think the MOU between CCTA and TriDelta is targeted for April. And right about that same time or shortly thereafter, we would look to release the RFP. This RFP would be for a developer team to proceed with us through that whole first pre-development phase that I talked about, which itself is sort of split into two phases: the define feasibility of an initial segment, and then proceed to do NEPA and CEQA and further design, up to call it a 30% level. Basically what you would do if you were going to market with this project in a normal bid environment. So that is what this RFP will be soliciting. Within that pre-development agreement, like many of these two-step processes that you may or may not have bumped into before, but very similar to CMGC, there will be a point in time, which from today, looking out is pretty far off in the future, when you would get to kind of a guaranteed maximum price and a negotiated agreement with that partner. And then you would execute a separate development agreement. Or if you don't like the terms you're getting to, you would have the ability to not proceed with them and take all of that work that you've done over the pre-development phase and go bid it to somebody else, to keep folks honest. So that's, again, pretty far off in the future, but May, we hope to release the RFP for this pre-development phase, select in the summer, and execute the pre-development agreement in the fall, about September. And then it takes a long time to develop these projects. We're thinking probably early 2025. Assuming everything goes well and there's an identified initial segment and we get through environmental, then you'd be in a position to ink an actual construction agreement, development agreement, 2 to 3 years out. So that's kind of the big picture on all of this. I think from here, Stephanie, I think we wanted to open it up to questions because that is a lot, and there was a lot more provided in the supporting materials. So as much or as little as is helpful, we're happy to answer questions.
Great, thanks, Brent. Appreciate that. I have one question to start it off. So this development team, do you expect it to be sort of a partnership within itself? Because there's several, really big aspects that not many companies will have the expertise in. So I'm expecting there'll be some partnerships formed to respond to the RFP.
Absolutely. I think our expectation is at a minimum, you would likely have a large infrastructure developer, equity type, and somebody who's bringing the technology, the system technology provider, somebody like a Glideways, to use them as an example. I think whether or not they bring along a large construction firm at this point in time, I think they may or may not see benefit in that, depending on how well they think they could sharpen their pencils on costs without that person on the team.
All right, because I'm just thinking as a private partnership, public-private partnership, knowing the financial numbers in order to get a private entity in there, you're going to really have to know those financials. You can transfer the risk, but you got to transfer some of the reward along with that. Otherwise, they're not going to take the risk. So,
exactly right.
Great. All right. Other questions? That was no. Oh, sorry, Tom. I didn't say. Let me go to Tom first. I see he's got his correct hand up. Tom.
Okay, thank you. Is this going to require an operating subsidy?
Our starting point, and by the way, Tim, I think you're on, and Stephanie, feel free to jump in at any point if you don't want me talking. Our starting point is, we hope no. We hope that these new technologies allow for operations and maintenance that pays for itself. But I think we're a long ways from knowing the answer until we've developed, what is the initial project segment? How much will it cost to build? And, further refined all of those operating characteristics. And that'll all be nailed out during the PDA phase.
So if that's successful, it would be unique in that it
It would.
requires no operating subsidy.
It would.
Yeah, well, good luck. All right, thank you.
Newell?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. And I think my question is going to be directed towards Tim. So I think this is a high level kind of view. First of all, this is a great idea. And I don't mean the methodology. And that's what I'm worried about. The great idea is we want to do something to move in different ways with a technology that we don't have that isn't just off the shelf. And we can't just sit down and design. So that's our motivation. And I think that as an agency is where we ought to be. And I think this is moving us in the right direction. I have a lot of concern about the approach that we're taking. And that we can get lost in that approach, that we can get so wrapped up in how we're going to do it. The complexity of it can create its own destiny to failure. And in a simple view, if there's a new technology out of there that's out in the marketplace, and there are investors out there believe that there's a model for it, then it will drive itself. We can facilitate that. If we think we're going to be somehow grabbing that and pulling it in, then it begs the question, and again, put aside the complexity of all of the ways you can do public-private. It ultimately gets down to, is there a revenue model? And investors, if they don't see the revenue model, then there is no public-private partnership. And as Tom said, it means you got to subsidize it. So we're fooling ourselves that it's a true public-private partnership. So if there's a really strong revenue model out there that the investment community says, yeah, we're willing to invest in this technology, and with the help of the public authorities, because we need those right-of-ways and all of that, that works, that's great. But on the operational side, it really, really worries me that we build something that ends up like it doesn't work. It needs to be maintained by a public authority. It needs to be run. And I wouldn't hesitate to say that may be our solution. Maybe we take the inventiveness and the creativeness that's outside of the norm and use that skill set to design, build, get this done. But ultimately, the operation of that system is going to need a sustainable future, because the revenue model, it isn't there. And I'll tell you why. You don't even have to look at the map. There is no transportation system on the planet except for airplanes and certain high-speed rails in other countries that pay for themselves. But guess what? The high-speed rail in Europe takes an incredible amount of subsidy. So BART has the highest revenue, or used to, fare box recovery. And look at the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars it takes to subsidize it. It's not cost effective. It isn't. So if we think that this system has some magic juice that's hidden someplace that says, well, this has a revenue model, it's going to pay for itself. It won't. It's public transportation. It's the cost of doing it. It's the safety features. It's all of those overlays that I would approach this in just a little bit simpler view. And what I mean by what I worry about, you've seen in all the science fiction movies, is the World's Fair in New York. I mean, this is a graveyard of the future, that we have to be careful that we don't make this so complex and how it's done. And if you had a 90% chance, and you got to go through 10 steps, and this we have to go through 100% chance or 100 steps to get there. And even if you had a 90% chance, you have only a 10% chance of success. And I just worry that this has an incredible amount of complexity in the way we're approaching it. And I would just take a step back. There's a design solution. Does it then effectively connect people? And then how do we get to that point? There is so much money out there for transportation systems, if they work, that I wouldn't rely on the complexity of how to finance and how to do all that. It's more public-private partnerships is either there's a revenue model that absolutely works, and God knows airplanes are about the only ones that have figured it out, and theirs is a debt financing structure, and they've figured that out. But we still subsidize it because the airports take billions of dollars of subsidy to make them work. So they get a free ride. So in truthfulness, there's no transportation system in the planet. Even when you look at cruise lines, they're subsidized by all of us. We create all of the ports, all the connections, and we build those. Yeah, they charge fees, but the public subsidizes 90% of it. So in this case, that revenue model isn't really there by definition. I mean, unless we can use Star Trek transportation one spot to the other, it doesn't. So how are we going to do this and simplify this process? Because it also likens to when we had a whole bunch of suits in the room and they were selling us a way to finance. And it was the worst thing. It's illegal at a public agency to do it. And nobody here was on the board, I think, that I'm looking in the room now, or staff member that was here when we did that. And we finally got out of that process. And it really was a bad decision. But the complexity of it, and everybody talked about it. And the board really goes, wow, this must be a bunch of people in here that really are smart and going to do this. And it wasn't. And I'm really worried about the complexity is driving this, and it isn't a solution-driven problem. Solution.
I'm going to jump.
I'm really worried about this.
I'm going to jump in quick. I have to go get my father from his blood transfusion.
Yep.
So I apologize for my first day as chair. Then I'm going to have to turn over to Mayor Tom Butt. Tom, you got to take over the meeting for me. I need to go get my father out of the hospital.
All the best, Sue.
Thanks.
So everyone, this is Tim Hale, just in response to Commissioner Arnrich's comments, and there's a lot to unpack there. And
yeah,
I think there's certainly risk, right, to the whole project. And that is how you manage risk in this complex of a project is really addressing it with a partnership with the private sector as well as the public sector. And so Brent captured it a little bit in the end of the presentation, but that is the whole. There's gates within this system pre-development agreement, and really the first gate is to bring in the private sector, and then as well as the public sector and the technology provider, to really understand how this is all going to work. There needs to be a ridership revenue investment grade analysis. There needs to be more design work to better understand what the capital expenditures are going to have to be. There has to be the ridership revenue analysis is really going to help determine what the operational expenditures are going to be. And so I think, what we do is we set up this pre-development agreement in a way that says, if we don't feel comfortable with the outcomes within this first step, then we all walk away. We all walk away. And to your point, Commissioner Arnrich, in terms of it, being potentially a bad decision, but as Brent was mentioning, we're not relinquishing control of the process. And it really allows us to do more investigations with the private sector, because ultimately your concern is well, you have lots of concerns, but one of the concern is revenue risk, right? On the back end, when we're operating this, who is actually going to hold the revenue risk in terms of backfilling the operations with subsidies, et cetera. And that is something that we have been discussing with the private sector during these one-on-one meetings. And that's been a real key factor, as who's going to own that revenue risk. And right now, as part of our discussions, we are pushing that revenue risk to the private sector. And that really is pushing them to pick the right technology, as well as look at ways to how you're going to finance this in a way that will make this project successful and attractive to them. And so it's really about understanding, bringing in the private sector, understanding the risk, where we can put equity, where we can put, state and federal funding to help kind of push that equity into the operating phase as much as possible. So that way you're avoiding or trying to minimize the amount of potential subsidies that you may need to operate the project in the operation phase. But like I mentioned, if there are going to be subsidies as part of the project and there's no funding for those subsidies, then we walk away after that first little initial step. And that initial step within the system pre-development agreement, we're only talking about a 6 to 9 month phase. So within 6 to 9 months, we would know whether or not this is really a truly feasible project with the private sector and as well as with CCTA, the public sector. And then we would decide whether or not we're going to move forward with the project or not. So it's really this first 6-9 months phase is really that due diligence phase to see if we're really going to move forward or not.
Yeah, I would just, Tim, thanks for that. Just to be clear, I don't have any concern about the revenue model. The math isn't that complicated. The reality is that there will be a public subsidy. I don't have a problem with that. That's what makes transportation systems work. But my overarching concern, and you've been in them, in my world, I live in public-private partnerships in building things. And this is about building something. This just sounds so friggin' complicated, to be blunt, that we're overcomplicating. Keep it simple. That's all. Keep it simple, KISS, right? Keep it simple and focus on the solution of a movement system and not so much the complexity of all that other stuff. And I that's all I worry about. We can get so caught up in all of this. Well, we could do it this way. We could do that. Forget about it. Problem, solution, design, then financing. Just keep it low. I think it's being overcomplicated in the process right now. So yeah, move slowly. Put all the stuff that's down the road off the table right now. My point is keep it simple. I just see a destiny to failure. And I mean, because of the complexity and the number of bodies involved. It's not as complicated as we think. It's not unique to do public-private partnerships. We don't have to reinvent the world in that. Take what we know and we're good at it. And let's move forward that way. That's all. I'm concerned about the process.
If you
I think we've lost you.
I can respond to Commissioner Arnrich if you like. But I think in terms of the complexity of the project, I think, P3s have not been done in California, and the complexity has to do with I'll say that the feasibility study really identified the solution. And that's how we kind of arrived at the project today.
Tim, I think we're losing you entirely.
Yeah.
Is we want better transit integration in East Contra Costa County, and through that integration.
Maybe
Can you hear me now?
No. You keep breaking up.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, I had to join with my phone today.
That's way better.
Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Can you hear me now?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what I was saying was, in terms of the study actually determined was, we need a better transit integration in East Contra Costa County. We have these park and rides, we have BART stations, we have potential ferry service in the future, Amtrak, San Joaquin, etc. And we really want to take these 4 cities, these downtown areas, as well as these
And we're losing you.
Tim, you're gone again.
So if you try turning off your video, sometimes that helps with bandwidth.
access points and better in a unique system and into that. And that, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you just keep cutting out, Tim. We're not really.
Yeah, not really, Tim. I mean, I can add something. Well, maybe Tim, you're getting back to a place with better service. And it's not disagreeing at all about complexity and keeping it simple. I agree entirely. And the private sector is only going to invest in something they can understand. I think the structure that was up there, I want to flag a couple things. One, really, we're trying to do two things. One is pair up the essential team members to deliver the project. And really, there's a lot on that diagram, but it really comes down to somebody with technology and somebody with money who may take revenue risk or not, or somebody who can get money. So it's really money and technology. Everything else is in the structure basically for optionality. And, I didn't go into a ton of detail, but we did talk about this in the industry day one-on-ones, that structure diagram, each one of those arms could collapse on itself if you didn't use, if you didn't have color of money constraints. Basically, every box on that chart is solving for one unfortunate legal constraint, mostly related to color of money in California. But at the end of the day, really, I think we see a couple key team members who would engage contractors later, and not a complicated structure. That is presented the way it is to show optionality to the private sector and basically give them more places where they could, potentially see a return, whether that's on the construction side or on the revenue investment side, et cetera. So it is complex, I agree, but it can also very easily collapse in on itself, and it's designed that way. Tim, are you back by chance?
Tom, remember you're in charge.
So what I was going to say, in terms of where I was finishing with the dynamic, personal microtransit feasibility study, was that was the solution. And then as Brent was alluding where I was going, is then we had to figure out this is a revenue generating communities of public-private partnerships. And so with that being said, and Brent, exactly what I was just going to say is, as much as that diagram and everything is looks super complicated, essentially what this looks like is you need 5 pieces to the puzzle. You need someone to deliver the project, and that's really CCTA. We're really good at this stuff. We know how to deliver projects. We know how to leverage alternative delivery. Ivan's already working with CMGC on the Iron Horse Trail pedestrian overcrossing. And then we need an operations and maintenance partner. And that's where Tri-Delta Transit comes into play. And then with that, you need a designer to design it, a contractor, a technology provider, and someone that's going to pay for it. And so those are all the aspects of really pulling this together. And ultimately, we're not going to enter into a contract with all of those entities. We're going to have an MOA with Tri-Delta Transit with really CCTA as the lead. And then you're going to have an agreement with a private developer team, and that developer team is really going to look at the technology and the equity side. And then, depending on the color of money and the limit and the complexity and the limits of the legal authority here with the Infrastructure Finance Act, is that we may have separate contracts for construction, and that's how simple this project is really going to turn out. And that's no different than when we do a design bid build project. We have a designer, we have a contractor, and I think typically with a technology project, we're going to have some sort of system integrator or system provider, like the Express Lanes project on I-680. There was a technology provider there, a system integrator that worked on the project. And so now we're adding this equity aspect to it to finance the project. And so it's no different than even an I-680 Express Lanes project, where you have a designer, a contractor, and a system integrator. It's really adding the equity component to it, is that fourth arm.
Tim, I think that is a perfect explanation. And I think what Brent said while you were getting connected there, present it that way. This presentation is very complicated, and it doesn't need to be. And the more you present it complicated, it's more what you're thinking. Keep it as simple as you said. Between the two of you, I would redo this presentation in a way, if you're going to present this to the board. And going forward to the public, keep it simpler. Don't add. Certainly there's risk. Use the word risk. Don't use the complexity of your org chart to define that risk. And if this happened, boom, this blow. I mean, just keep it simple. And I think we'll be successful. I love the project. Don't get me wrong. I'm 100% behind it. Just worried about how we're presenting and the processing of it. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Harwich. And I think what we were intending to do is providing more of this detailed conversation with APC. And then we're going to certainly provide a much more simpler presentation for the full authority board. That was kind of our intent as well.
Tom, you're up.
I was going to say, Vice Chair, but I think it's back to you.
So we'll close the item and.
Hey, Tom, you're in charge now, so I'm done. If there's any other questions or whatever we're going to do on this.
Yeah, I think really what we could do is if there's no other questions on this item, we can close this item for discussion and move. Commissioner Butt, if you want to move to the next item, which is the mid-year budget, and Brian will be providing the presentation.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so let's move on to item C, approval of fiscal year 2021-22 mid-year budget for the Authority and Congestion Management Agency.
Well, good morning to all of you. Let me go to full screen mode here. And as mentioned, this is the mid-year budget. And so as we start the budget process, we look at last year's fiscal budget, and that fiscal budget is starting in April and May. And some of those changes in the construction side and our revenue projections and our funding that has come in, and some of our projects that are delayed move to the second year or later in the fiscal year, and sometimes to the next fiscal year. It's kind of the capital program is the most difficult part of the budget. It's just a timing issue of everything that goes on. But again, our strategic plan and the Measure J was established to collect sales tax revenues. We all know this. I'm going to kind of go through this quickly based on the length of this meeting this morning, but I do want to touch on some of the highlights on all the pages so that you guys all understand. It's been a thorough analysis by staff. I worked with Hisham and we work on the strategic plan, and he comes forward and he helps designate what is being funded by Measure J. But the biggest item, sales tax over the last couple of years for you and for CCTA at your agencies is very difficult to project. And when we brought the budget together, it was in April and May that we came up with these revenue numbers, and we ended up last fiscal year coming in at $107.2 million. That was extraordinary for all of us. So as we look to this budget year, I've been working with HDL, and we meet on a quarterly basis, and they give us new revenue projections based off of everything that's happening. We have a 40-year high CPI, and as the items increase, at whether it be general consumer goods, whether it be the gas or the cars and different things like that, what does that mean? That means more taxes are being paid, and more taxes being paid is more revenue to CCTA. So our actual, for 6 months, the last 6 months, we have the actual revenue numbers is at $60.7 million. And I remember giving a sales tax presentation, I think many quarters ago. And one of the number one questions is why does it jump up so much? And it's a little different in every quarter. Well, in the September to December quarter, people are always spending a lot more money, whether it be the holidays, whether it be travel for Thanksgiving, and then the holidays in December as well. So in working with HDL, we have increased our sales tax numbers to $108 million. And here is just the snapshot of everything that's happened and all the different changes that we have. Sales tax up $10 million. Federal, state, and local revenues A lot of that is dependent on our CIP program, but we also have federal and state money that comes in to do some work in planning. We also have some local revenues. We have about 2.4, I believe, which is the San Ramon for the bridge crossing there. Investment and other income, that's our investments. We have about a little over $70 million invested with a financial advisor. As you know, interest rates are so low, our revenue is going to be so low, but also in here is our market value. So CCTA in our annual financial report, we book everything on a market value basis, and that can go up as we hold investments that are a higher interest rate and interest rates go down. There's a change in our investment reporting, but if we hold everything to maturity, which we do sell things a little early to capitalize on getting some additional money in the long run on different items. So not to spend too much time on investment income, but it's a very important piece because it also helps pay for some additional costs for whether it be salaries and benefits or some additional programs that we have going. The project section, that's always the one that changes. As you can see this year, it's just a small decrease, just a timing of certain projects that get deferred to the next year or completed in the prior fiscal year. The program section, as our revenues go up, we also pay money out, but we also have the PED bike programs and we have the TLC programs. And so what we did is we brought down some of the projections that we thought some of the cities were going to deliver. Excuse me. And so that there's kind of a really small increase there. But if you take $10 million, you increase it, local street maintenance, that means we're going to put out another $2 million to the local agencies. Planning section, we had a number of new contracts for the planning section. So there's an increase of about $600,000. Administrative section, we have some extra expenditures in there, and I'll cover that as we go through the slide. Debt service, we refinanced a bond. When we put the budget together last year, we didn't know what the June bond issuance was going to do. And so we had a $1.3 million savings in our projections for just this fiscal year. And it should move forward as about $42 million level debt service going out. Again, we talked about sales tax. As we look across the board really quickly here, you could just see the last couple fiscal years, and there was a decrease because of the pandemic. And then we had the strong increases of consumer spending, people buying vehicles. We can also see this mid-year is 108. Gas prices are going up. People are starting to go on vacations. People are traveling to work. And so far this year, we have about $62 million. We're doing really well so far. And as we look at the capital projects, here are state, local, and federal funding here for the individual items. Some of the decreases there are, again, the timing of projects, our reimbursement process. When we talk about some of our federal surface transportation funding, we get about $1.2 million to help fund the CMA function that we have here at CCTA. And then part of that funding is the CMA local agencies. So when they're working on a project that is global for Contra Costa County, working on everything there, and we don't have enough external funding, that's spread among the agencies based off of population. And then we also have some TFCA money. That's a local fund. It's about $1.7 million. And then again, City of San Ramon is going to contribute about $2.3 million for their project. The biggest section of the capital projects is always what is in the strategic plan, what is going to be funded by MSJ, the Measure J. And so we have 40, as we look at this schedule on the left-hand side, we go through all of the projects. We have about $45.4 million in proposed budget. And then we have about $25.2 million, which is external funding sources. And that leaves Measure J at $20 million. And as we've been talking about for the last several years, we have delivered the majority of our projects. And so the funding that is available in Measure J is getting lower and lower for the capital project program. But we're going out and we're getting external grants to work on the 680 corridor, and some of that funding is in there as well. The biggest item in there is the SR4 680 interchange, which has the Measure J strategic plan funding some money in there. And all of this is planned for a multi-year process by Hishon. Again, these are just the changes on the individual items. I'm going to kind of skip through this really quickly. Everything has been worked on with the projects team, and I commend them for all of the work and digging down and sharpening their pencils and working through this. It's never a loss of funding. It's never a loss of a project. It's always the project timing, whether it was completed faster in the previous year or it's being deferred to next year based off of construction project status. Administration is going up $141,000. In there, we have about $100,000 expenditure for creating Zoom rooms, new equipment. We did have some video equipment that was in there, but that was put in when we moved into the building in 2010. That is outdated. So we're replacing that and using a consultant to install these. Again, this is all going to be set up so that we can move forward and have our hybrid meetings, our in-person meetings, and move forward with that. The authority salaries and benefits for all of CCTA staff went up about $148,000. When I put the budget together, I run through some analysis, we go through, and then as we hire individuals, we give out raises and CPI at the end of the year. We know CPI for next year is going to be 3.5%. And then again, programs is again, as revenues go up, we pay out more money to all of our pass-through agencies. The biggest one is street maintenance at 20%. But in this budget here, we were able to reduce some expenditure projections that we had for the TLC program and the ped bike, which kind of brings it to a net zero increase. The planning section, as I mentioned earlier, we have an increase. We have some BMT mitigation program, what we're doing some community outreach that's in there. And then we had to go ahead and increase our streetlight data expenditures, but it is also offset about $140,000 of revenue that's coming from the local agencies that are participating in that streetlight. Debt service, I'd mentioned earlier, is going down $1.3 million. Again, it's the timing of the refinance of the June bond that we did, and us adopting the budget at the same time and not knowing what the effect was at the moment when we adopted the budget. So with that, I would like to move forward and seek your approval to go ahead and take this to the authority board and then make the budget amendments as presented in this month. Any questions?
Oh, thank you. Are there any questions from board committee members? Go ahead, Newell.
Brian, hey, thank you. It's always, I love listening to you, and I love how you look at finances and things like that. The one question I have, and maybe I'm just, my brain's not working today. It looks like you're asking for an adjustment on salaries and benefits in those two categories. It's about $500,000, 348 and 100 and something. And are you saying that at mid-year, we're $500,000 short in what you originally budgeted? Because revenue has nothing to do with that expense. So what was it that we didn't plan for that came up? Just on your last slide, you showed $348,000 increase on congestion management staff. And on one of the other slides, there was another staff increase.
That is a great question. As I sped through the process really fast, I apologize based on the timing. Authority-wide, I'm asking for an additional $148,000 in there to cover the current staff because as we start the process, I throw a number out there that I think everybody's, what the costs are going to be, and then and some of the changes that happen through reviews and different things like that. But why did the CMA, which is your question, why did the CMA go up? There's a reallocation of staff. So staff members are charged among many programs within CCTA. And then there is money that comes in, federal money that comes in to pay for the CMA functions. There's many staff members that are working on delivering those projects and programs. And so I'm moving some of them from the projects division, bringing them into that federally funded. It's a reallocation of people's.
Great. That's the good point. And you're right. There's an income and a cost. Yeah, perfect. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. I knew you had a great answer. Thanks very much.
Any other questions from committee members? Do we have any public comments?
I see no hands raised.
Okay, I think we're ready for a motion to approve.
Yeah, I'd move the item as presented. And
Okay.
Brian, thanks again to you and your
Motion
team.
by Arnerick, and we
No.
have a
Second,
second
Geringer.
by Geringer. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Yes. Chair Nowak is absent. Vice Chair Butt,
Yes.
Member Arnrich,
Yes.
Member Geringer,
Yes.
and Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes with members present.
Okay, the next item is correspondence and communications. I don't see anything listed under this. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? So we'll move on to commissioner and staff comments. Chair's comments and reports, I guess as vice chair. The only thing I have is, it's not really transportation related, but it did come from Caltrans, the Clean City grants or Clean California grants were announced a couple of days ago, and Richmond got 2 at $5 million each. So we got a total of $10 million, I think is much or more than any other city in the state. So that's a Caltrans. It's not transportation, but it's Caltrans administered program. Are there any comments from committee members, commissioners? I don't see any. Executive staff comments?
Yeah, Commissioner Butt, thank you. I don't really get an opportunity during the meeting to say thank you to our outgoing chair, Newell Arnrich. So I just want to really appreciate the leadership over the last year, and thank you for everything that you did to support the overall authority. And soon, Commissioner Nowak's not here, but just looking forward to working with her in the coming year. And I do see that Lindsay has a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
Hi, Commissioners. I'll keep it short. There are just a few items that I wanted to bring to your attention where CCTA will be out in the community or hosting events. So I know that Tim had sent each of you a schedule for some pop-up events and virtual workshops we're hosting related to the countywide transportation plan. And we'd love for you to join us for any, all, or part of those as your schedule allows. Please feel free to drop in and say hello. I also wanted to remind you that our Redefining Mobility Summit is still on track to happen April 5th in person at the Bishop Branch Roundhouse Conference Center. So hopefully you have that marked on your calendars. I know it's been on our board calendar. And lastly, we are actually looking to host a groundbreaking event for the McCollum pedestrian overcrossing in Brentwood in March. We are tentatively targeting March 18th, so that's coming up very quickly, and we'll get an official notice out shortly, but we wanted to just be sure that we mentioned that here as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any other staff comments? Any other business? Okay, it looks like it's time to adjourn. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you, some of you tonight at the mayor's conference.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all.